Nevada Governor Joe Lombardo delivers his first ever State of the State. Our experts weigh in on his address this week on Nevada Week.
Support for Nevada Week is provided by Senator William H. Hernstedt.
Welcome to Nevada Week. I'm Amber Renee Dixon. On Monday, January 23rd, newly elected Republican Governor Joe Lombardo gave his first State of the State address, outlining his plans for the upcoming legislative session. Following the speech, we talked to a panel of experts about what he hopes to accomplish. Joining us that night were Jessica Hill, politics reporter for the Las Vegas Review-Journal, David Damore, chair of the Department of Political Science at UNLV, Warren Hardy, former Republican state senator and principal strategist for Warren Hardy Strategies, as well as former Democratic state assemblywoman and former Clark County Commissioner Chris Giunciliani. Here's what they thought about Governor Lombardo's speech.
I thought it was a very good speech. I think he hit the high points of the things he wants to accomplish in this first session. And I was really encouraged with what he had to say regarding the changes on workforce development and bringing some accountability to that and focusing that in the right direction, and really encouraged with what his plans for mental health. That is such a critical thing for our community, and I'm really encouraged to hear him give so much emphasis to that.
We'll get back to that. Chris Giunciliani, from the Democratic perspective, what stood out to you?
I do think he delivered well. He delivered better than I thought he was going to do. He's not had that kind of a role in the past, so I think he's getting into that side of it and governing. I have to say the pre-K funding was very, very important, and I think that's a big win and a place where he can bring a compromise and work with the Democrats across the aisle. You have to find those little nuanced places. The forensic hospital will be very key. We need to look at how we govern and how we police. I do think that there's a few things that I think the state employee increases are absolutely phenomenal, long overdue. I wish there was some in there for teachers, but there was some programming money. But at least there was an acknowledgement of the state employees and the fact that they are so short-staffed right now that the salary increase, it won't get them competitive, and we won't stop losing them completely to local governments, but it can help with that flow.
So I was just going to say, it's good to be a new governor with a big budget surplus, right? He gets to go in there, play Santa Claus a little bit, not have to bring cuts in. I think the speech was very moderate, right? Realizing the sort of context he's in, finding those areas where he can compromise, but also trying to throw some red meat to the conservatives on some of those issues.
Chris and Warren, when we talk about the budget, he does propose several cuts, tax cuts, but then there's a lot of spending in there. When you think about it in your head, does it all add up? Does it make sense?
I was trying to add up in my head, and I don't know where it actually lands. I was always frustrated when we started the rainy day fund. It was actually when Warren and I served, and I want a savings account, but not an overly prosperous savings account, especially when there's so many needs still within the state that even he can't address, and the legislature is going to be interested in. So I think $630 million and increasing that by 10% is a huge leap. Refunding it, yeah, okay, that it was necessary during the pandemic, so you want that balance that's there. But you know, schools, they did put he recommended some money for schools. I just don't think it's enough. Teacher salaries are not competitive, and so there was no addressing that part of it. I think the mental health piece, though, I applaud him. I agree with Warren on that. I think refocusing just our students, but also our community is a trying time, and recognizing that mental health is a problem that needs to be addressed, and you have to do that both with staffing, psychiatrists, and bringing in social workers, and all those pieces that make it work in the long run. I think that he put a few buzzwords in there, and yes, it's probably red meat for those. I don't see vouchers going anywhere. It's inappropriate. You don't even fund public schools adequately, and you're throwing some money at it, but you're going to peel it off and give it to opportunity grants and to school vouchers. I just don't see that happening, and he'll need to pick his fights.
Let's get more into school choice, okay. But before that, if she can't make sense of the budget, can you?
No, Chris was as good at the budget as anybody, maybe Bob Beers, anybody I know. And I think that the rainy day fund was probably one of three things Chris and I agreed on in our 20 years of service together. Here's the encouraging thing to me about the budget, and we're going to have to dig into this and figure out how he did all that. But I think we got some indication when he talked about the gas tax and that he was going to use a portion of the surplus to supplant that money to give tax breaks to Nevadans right now. The encouraging thing to me is there's nothing in that budget that, according to his speech tonight, that will create ongoing expenses, that it'll be all sort of one-shot money. And I hope there's a lot in the budget that will give tax relief to Nevadans with using the surplus. Because that's an effective thing to do with it. I remember in the Gwynn years, we did the money from the DMV that we sent back. That was just a huge redistribution of wealth. I was in the legislature at the time, and I didn't like that. This approach is better, I think. So we'll have to see the details of it. But my sense is with Ben Kekeffer there, I mentioned Bob Beers, maybe nobody knows the state budget better than Ben Kekeffer either. And so it's going to work. I have a high level of confidence. I don't know what it is, how it's going to work, but with Ben there to help navigate the process, it's going to work.
What may not work is school choice. I heard when the governor said politics should not be part of education, I heard you scoff a little, David. What were you thinking?
I mean, obviously, he campaigned on that. That's been an issue that conservatives have been pushing for a while. But, I mean, at the end of the day, he's going to, I don't know what he'd have to give up to a Democratic legislature to get that. I think that'll be the interesting thing when we get down to the last day of June and those negotiations are happening. So I'm interested to see how much, if that's a sword he's going to, he's going to die on.
What do you think, Jessica?
Like you said, I think it'll be interesting to see what he'll do if it has to do with the budget, if he could, suspend getting the budget filled out just in order to get the school choice done. It'll be really interesting to see. Some of those things I don't know he'll be able to get done with the Democratic legislature.
You can't have it both ways. And I think that's part of what's happening there. Now, there are ways to do school choice without funding changes. Yes, you can do open zoning. There's a variety of different structures that you can change that let parents and students pick schools based on their interests. But you have to get the school districts to put back in, I think, career ed in middle school. You need to start doing all those things that we got rid of. And then parents then say, oh, I want my kid to go over there. They're teaching X, instead of just only 4 magnet schools where only certain people can have opportunity. Spread that opportunity around. So there's ways to restructure public education to make it look like school choice that's a reality without taking public tax dollars to give away to private or parochial or charter or anything else.
Well, at the same time, you see charter as the fastest growing part of the public schools, right? It's going to be the second biggest district in the state here. So you're already starting to see people move with their feet, make their choices with their feet using charter schools.
And there had been discussion of changes to property taxes to fund education. You had mentioned while we were listening to the speech that it was not addressed, Warren. Do you think that was a mistake?
Well, I think it's a big bite of the apple. I mean, I was encouraged that the $5 million to look at higher ed, the funding system for higher ed, long overdue. That's an issue that I recognized when I was there, 20 years ago. But $5 million, I think maybe we can fund more of a global revenue study in the state of Nevada, but not just a study, a plan. Yeah. When Chris and I were there, they had the Price Waterhouse study in 1989. I don't think we've done a comprehensive look at the tax structure in Nevada since then. Right. We nibble around the edges. I call it taxes by adhocracy. Who are we going to attack this session? Who's we going to attack next session? And our tax policy is just broken in Nevada. And a part of it's not really the legislature's fault because we put a lot of our tax policy in the Constitution, which is no way to govern. But we need to take a step back, take a comprehensive look to see if our revenue structure or our tax structure and revenue structure matches our economy. I don't think any of us know that. And that's what happened. I was there. Chris was there when we did the property tax cap. And there were things that should have been considered that never even came up because we didn't really understand the connection with all these things. It's time for Nevada to step back, spend the money, and $5 million will do it. To do a comprehensive, not just study, but plan for how our revenue structure works in Nevada. And it might be hard, but it might be politically difficult, but I think you can start by doing it in a tax revenue neutral way. But I'm suspect of any tax proposal or anything we do until we've got that kind of a comprehensive study in our pocket.
Anything you want to add?
I would agree. You need to plan. So look back at the Price Waterhouse. We still have our copies around. And what it did is it really analyzed, what does sales tax do? Who do you really hit with sales tax? The property tax it's not adequate, and the cap defeats the whole purpose in the long run. That was a kind of a knee-jerk reaction to Prop 13 that was coming into Nevada, and that's really how that all came about. And then we had a disparity. So you now have a disparity in your property tax versus if you're residential and commercial. Your neighbor's growing less and you're growing more depending on where you live. That needs to be looked at. And that would be a worthwhile task force to take on. Carol Villardo's notes are probably still someplace, or she'll channel it. I mean, we tried to change it from the Department of Tax to the Department of Revenue because we wanted people to understand revenue means receipts. It's what you collect and then what do you do with it when you're governing. And so it was a better way to track where some of those dollars go.
Yeah, the challenge we have in Nevada is you can't look in an instructive way at any other state. You look back at the tax shift. Some people call it the tax shaft. Chris, thank you. Right on cue. In 1981, where it made perfect sense in our economy to think about moving away from a property tax structure to a sales tax structure. Hasn't worked, and that was done in a vacuum. We make all these decisions in a vacuum, and every tax policy I've been involved with, and unlike most Republicans, I've supported most of the tax increases at some level in my time in the Senate because I saw the need for services. But they are not informed by a base study about what is unique about Nevada, and we are very different than any other state. You can't put us into the same box or look at other states in an instructive way. Right. We have to do our own study.
Sticking with education, Jessica, you were interested in learning what he had to say about restorative justice, how children within the school system are punished, and were changes that were made effective. What did you think about his proposals in scaling that back?
Yeah, I mean, we saw this a lot through his campaign. You know, he was talking, that was a big talking point among many Republicans, you know, restorative justice, it's scary, you know, all these violent students are being let out when they should be suspended. However, I don't know if that's really the reality of restorative justice programs. Usually those are referring to nonviolent misdemeanors. You know, maybe a kid is caught with marijuana or something, or there's a dispute between two children, and they kind of figure out how to talk the differences out rather than, you know, being suspended. So I think there's just a little bit of miscommunication with what the reality of restorative justice is. You know, it's a nice thing to talk about. You know, you could point to some of those violent incidences with students, you know, harassing their teachers and getting arrested, and those are, you know, one-offs with the majority of students.
As a former teacher, Chris?
I would say with 320,000 students, they are one-offs. You have some bad apples, and you're going to have some bad apples, but putting in a mediation program, for example, bring back some of the in-house suspension so the kids aren't just dumped out in the street. There's different things that could be done. I'm the one who actually wrote the 3 strikes you're out truancy legislation, and because teachers were frustrated with habitual offenders and no one was addressing it. And to get the attention, it really is a mental health component. And you're not finding social workers still, because actually UNLV got rid of the program 20 years ago and had to bring it back full-fledged. Then we weren't paying them enough, and so they had a principle with their budget. Oh, you got to hire this, and this, and maintenance, and that person. And so we really didn't recognize how a school should work and function. So just mentioning mental health, it makes me happy to hear, because at least it's not being dismissed. And I think you're absolutely right. Some of this stuff just passed, and you have to see how it's implemented. And if you have leadership that doesn't want it to be implemented and doesn't want it to work, I mean, I still volunteer regularly on school campuses, and the superintendent, I have not heard any conversation about restorative justice.
Warren, any response to that, or do you want to continue into the mental health aspect?
Well, I think it's all related, right? I mean, I think we have just completely dropped the ball in Nevada. I remember in '91 when we had the crisis and had to cut mental health, and we've never fully recovered.
We never
from
recovered.
That.
And the recession too, same thing.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the first place we go. And I'll tell you, I'm more than just encouraged, because what the governor has talked about in his budget regarding mental health is spot on to the problem. And I think it's informed by his time as a sheriff. And that is the facility at the jail and the facility at the Neal facility, Ross and Neal facility that will essentially triage these folks. Because right now, law enforcement just takes them to the emergency room.
Right.
And that's not how to deal with it. So if we're not even able to effectively triage people in the community, we can't even start to address mental health. So I think what the governor's proposed here is, not only am I thrilled to see it, it doesn't surprise me to see it in there because of his time in law enforcement, but I think it's spot on the right track. And I am just really excited about it.
David, what else do you think will be bipartisan that Governor
Obviously, the
Lombardo can
education
accomplish?
funding, right? Everybody wants to fund education. I think the higher ed stuff with, he put on the caveat more accountability, and they've been in the news lately with the audit. So I think that'll be a welcome news. What you didn't hear was some of the modernization stuff. I think we would like to see in terms of how state government works. I think he needs to get there to realize how dysfunctional it is. So I know that was an area that Sislak was moving to, but he didn't have that. I was also interested to see what he would say about a potential breakup with CCSD. That had been something he had talked a little bit about on the campaign. That obviously the measure didn't qualify. Unclear if that's something will bring a bill on that, but that was something else in terms of structural issues and that go into CCSD. Be interested to see how that plays out.
For the viewers sitting at home wanting to know, well, of what he talked about, what might actually happen this legislative session, who would give an answer to that? Jessica.
Oh, sure. I think the 12% increase in salary for state employees, I can see that being a real possibility of getting bipartisan support. That's a big
But that also creates a long-term liability moving forward. I think there's going to be some concern with some of the state agencies. I know higher ed's a little concerned about that. The enrollments aren't as strong, and we fund a lot of that out of student enrollment. So I think that you're thinking about down the road. It sounds great in the short term, but what does that mean long term?
And as you mentioned, there were no raises specifically mentioned for
teachers.
teachers when he campaigned on being Nevada's education governor.
Yeah, I was surprised. I mean, I'm thrilled about the pre-K funding and some of the other components, but I was surprised that he didn't recognize that we're not competitive. And if you're going to have a teacher shortage, and you go to my old school, Jim Bridger, I'm told there's 25, I think, substitutes on campus, and they're not counting and reporting the way they should be, and even though a law was passed last session to do so. And that is destabilizing. Warren supported me when I wrote the getting 1/5 more retirement credit if you worked on our more needy schools, our low-income schools and so forth, and that kept teachers in play, and it kept attracting them rather than fleeing to the burbs as far as that's concerned. We need to look at some structures there. The superintendent is good. Joni Ebert, I think, will be a good champion of taking a look at it, but you need people that are still on the ground that understand how things work once you pass a law. And not only the salaries will dishearten teachers who are already leaving in droves, it's not going to keep anybody here either, especially when they're frustrated with some of the management that's going on.
Warren, he did have some inclusions of there about retaining or bringing back retired teachers, also scholarships for teachers or for students who go on to become teachers locally. What else did you think that
Well,
he
first
did
of all,
for
I'm a
education?
product of Jim Bridger High School, junior high school, so I think I was there before you. Yeah, so I mean, that's an excellent point. And I think one of the things that's encouraging to me tonight is that a lot of what he talked about in terms of ongoing expenses hits directly at things that are problems that have gone unaddressed for a long time. The competitiveness of the teachers, that's the low-hanging fruit, right? Allow teachers to come back and teach without penalty to their retirement. That's an easy thing to do, low-hanging fruit. I've talked since I entered the Senate in 2002, 2003 about the need to get state employee salaries up, particularly when it relates to the Highway Patrol. I was an opponent and a steadfast opponent of collective bargaining for state employees. But every time I spoke against it, it was always accompanied by a conversation about, but we have to do more if we're going to retain them. The governor's speech tonight really, to me, shows an in-depth understanding of core problems in Nevada. He didn't get to all the answers. He didn't get to all the solutions. But the thing that's encouraging to me is it displays an in-depth understanding, which I didn't expect from a sheriff becoming governor. It really, in my opinion, displayed a real understanding of the core problems of Nevada. We'll get to all of
I
them.
think he listened, and that's a good thing. You want people that can listen. And then you're right, because the state police, we lose them constantly to local governments. So the two-step bump in that acknowledges that part of it, at least as far as that's concerned. But I was mentioning earlier, we still have a prohibition, though, for probationary periods, I'm told, in the state of Nevada. Even though you're qualified at this job, you meet your probation, but you get transferred over to Dieter or someplace else, you have to start all over again. That's a barrier. So hopefully his staff and legislators will start looking at where there's barriers to some of these approaches. You would look at the public option. It just got passed, so I don't know why that was thrown in there. It didn't quite make sense
It hasn't been
to
implemented
me.
either.
It hasn't even been implemented. So it's the right thing to do, but if you want to tweak something, then let's figure out where the problem is. But if you if it's not broken, don't fix it. And so those are some things that I think he's still going to have to flush out here, that the legislature will help him with. I have a feeling.
I heard you say that same thing, if it's not broken, don't fix it, when we talked about election
Yes.
reforms. What did you think about what he had to say, Jessica, in regards to that topic?
I think, it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, because obviously the Democratic legislature will not be keen on limiting or restricting any voting rights. One of the things that he mentioned, moving the mail-in ballot date back, to everything needs to be mailed in before Election Day rather than on Election Day and within 4 days to count. That's something that State Senator Titus is also pushing forward as well. But the likelihood of any of those passing is not likely at all. There are some other, real reforms that could be done that I would have liked to have seen from him. I know that lots of tribes in Nevada have expressed concerns about wanting to use their tribal ID, for instance, to register to vote online. That's like one real, reform that could be done that we haven't heard.
Student IDs, it's waffly on whether or not they
Student IDs,
recognize a student ID from school. So that was another barrier, because a lot of kids are not getting their driver's licenses anymore. So what ID did they use? So there's little pieces. So at least he brought something up, but I don't see I don't see most of that passing. But transparency, we do need election reform in that campaign finance reform, in ethical reform. Those are some places that I think you can get a bipartisan bite at the apple and really start going in on who's really paying who's funding where is that PAC money really coming from? How are legislators or electeds hiding behind certain shields or not? So I think there's some room to do the right thing rather than what just needed to be red meat, as David called it.
David and then Warren, and then we'll go back to you.
I mean, I think his idea of a redistricting commission, I think a lot of people would buy it, but unless it comes from the ballot, it's not going to happen. The Democrats aren't going to give that up.
And how big of an issue is that for the average voter?
None. I mean, it's inside baseball at the end of the day.
And it works smoothly. So what was broken?
Warren?
Well, the thing is, I tend to agree on the election reform stuff. I do think there's a possibility on point one that we can
The date.
The date. I mean, I think that was a national embarrassment for us, and it really shouldn't have been, because our election officials did an amazing job. They were restricted by the rules they had to work with, and so I think that's something we can have a serious conversation with. But I would say, to Chris's point, one of the things is being willing to have a dialogue, and some of the things that he brought up, you brought up the other things that could be done on securing or retaining employees. It's going to lead to a discussion about that. And if we have a legislature that's willing to come up with bipartisan solutions to these problems, we're going to, for the first time in a long time, have these discussions. And in my conversations with the governor's folks, they're willing to work with who will ever work with them. And my conversation with the speaker and the majority of the Senate, same thing. They're not interested in playing politics. Now, we'll see how it develops. You can't take politics out of politics. But for the first time, and I've been involved in every legislative session in this state in one capacity and another since '91. And when Chris and I were there, we fought during the elections, but we put those things aside, and we fought during the session too, but we were always looking towards doing what's best for Nevada. It seems lately that the legislature's become an extension of a campaign. What can we do to get this person? What can we do to get that person? We need to put them on the record. And I'm encouraged that we may be able to finally move on that. And that's not just what I heard tonight from the governor, but that's my conversation with the Democratic leadership as well. So having the conversation, and in a meaningful way, Chris and I were able to find compromise more often than not. Sometimes we fought, but it's all about the dialogue. So those ideas, they're not thinking of them yet.
If you
But
don't
once
have the
we get into
conversation, you'll never change anything.
And they'll bring
so-
those things up. You know, I
Exactly.
mean, you talk about school choice, politically very difficult. But as David says, the school breakup. I think there's room to have some dialogue about that this session. That may be where we end up on that topic.
I don't want 5 superintendents.
Chris and I
Jessica, what was
disagree.
it that you didn't get to?
Oh, I was just going to say that I think, if Republicans really frame the moving the date to, we're not trying to restrict anyone's right to vote or anything, but I do think some Democrats could get behind, with the DNC, for instance, how long it took for us to get our results in was a big factor. However, Joe Gloria, for instance, has said that this is the future of elections. Pretty soon he thinks we'll do away with in-person voting as a whole. And so we need to kind of move in that direction anyway. But I do think, some of those instances with, ballot harvesting, we haven't really seen a lot of ballot harvesting. That was another political talking point that I think Governor Lombardo used, but there really isn't that much of that. So some of those things I don't see moving forward, but I think that there is a chance for Governor Lombardo and the Republicans to really push for some bipartisan support.
In the Democratic response to the speech, Assemblyman Steve Yeager said Democrats were disappointed that the governor didn't lay out a plan to address affordable housing in Nevada and expressed, quote, grave concern, end quote, about proposals that would divert tax dollars from public schools to private institutions. To see the full State of the State address and the Democratic response to it, visit vegaspbs.org/Nevada Week. And thank you for watching.